Welcome back to the second segment of Think India HRC podcast, and here we have once again Mr. Khemu with us, who is the Kashmiri Pandits Association's president, and here we'll be continuing with our conversations. And sir, in our last segment, you mentioned that there was a mass struggle for the Kashmiri Pandits. So, what exactly were the struggles faced by the Kashmiri Pandits post the genocide in 1990?
You see, post-genocide led to exodus. Exodus meaning people had to leave their household, earnings, everything, and lock, stock and barrel, just not lock, stock and barrel, even empty-handed, on an emergency basis, they left Kashmir. Where to go? Nobody knew where to go. Initially, they thought it's a short-term period, we'll be back in 2 or 3 months, things will stabilize, but things never stabilized. So therefore, they were homeless, they were even penniless, and they had no place to go. Now, some people had relatives in Jammu or Delhi, so they temporarily went there till they would find some other place. The others actually landed in temples, landed in compounds, landed in no man's land, and there was a large number of refugee camps in Jammu where government gave them a tent. Initially, they stayed in places like Gita Bhavan, which is a temple complex where they got dal roti, and spent a few days until they got a tent, and in places where there was nothing. There was no hygiene, there was no water, these things came slowly, and they spent years in those tents. And the weather of Jammu wasn't conducive to the population of Kashmir. As you know, Kashmir is generally a colder climate. Jammu's plains, hot, extremely hot in summer. People died of snake bites, people died of infections, people died of scorpion bites. A lot of people faced psychological problems because they had to live there for a long time. The other major struggle was education for children. Now, Jammu itself was a small place. When 2.5, 3 lakh people landed there in a matter of days, Jammu didn't have infrastructure to take care of this. The schools were already full. So, the Kashmiri Pandit community, basically, their major tool of strength is education. They're all 100% educated society and they're working class. So, the whole thing broke down. Then slowly the schools in Jammu started another shift for these migrants or refugees of that so-called that time to accommodate them. So education itself became a problem. The biggest challenge in my opinion, which is a continuous challenge, is the threat to culture, threat to language. You see, because once nowadays, for instance, this community is scattered all over the place, all over the globe. And when this happens, the first victim becomes your language. And language is the major thing which binds the community together and sustains the culture. If language is lost, culture is lost, identity is lost. So that is the biggest challenge we continuously face. In fact, one of the major goals of our association here is to preserve this Kashmiri culture, preserve Kashmiri language, and we do attempts, but I know it's a tough challenge because people are scattered. Thankfully, as far as the education is concerned, it was the Maharashtra Government which was the first state which helped the community at that time. And a large number of students came for admissions to engineering, I think diplomas, hotel management, even MBAs that time, because they reserved one seat in every branch, in every engineering college. And I remember the first few years, almost 1,500 to 2,000 students used to come here for admissions to these colleges. And it helped a great deal. Today, most of them are working. They are working not only in India, they are also working abroad. They are in software industry, and things are much better today than they were. That 10 to 15 year struggle which the community faced. But yes, there were refugee camps in Jammu. There were refugee camps in Delhi. There are still people living there's a colony in Jammu which has been upgraded from tent accommodation to concrete apartment accommodation, 1-room apartment, 2-room apartments have been given. There's a township in Jammu which is called Jagti Township where still most of these people live there. But a large number has also settled, are better off than they were, and they are scattered all over the globe. I think the other boom which came that time was after the engineering admissions. The IT boom started somewhere after 1997, 98. By that time, the first batch of these students were passing out. So many of them got absorbed in the IT boom also, which helped them a great deal. So yes, the challenges were there, but today, as I said, it's much better than what it was. Today, many of the people have settled down and are able to contribute and are trying to revive what we have lost.
That's something good to hear. Moving on to my next question. In the early 2000s, it was said that the Kashmiri Pandits have tried to move back to their respective places in Kashmir, that is. So, do you think was that a successful move, and how and under what circumstances did that take place?
See, one can't say that it was successful because in 2000s, when the terrorist movement was still very active, whenever people tried to go back, they were the first targets. Because don't forget, part of this movement was to also take over the properties of Pandits. These had been taken over, their families were occupied, they were living in them. And if I, for example, went to reclaim, I would be a threat to them. So such killings happened in the initial period. Okay, anybody who went to retrieve something became a target and was killed. Today things are much better because the terrorism, in my opinion, is on its last leg. Most of the situation one saw in 90s and 2000s with large number of terrorists openly getting into exchange of fire with police, army, doesn't exist now. Now the hardcore terrorists are finished. Today you have a different kind of terrorism, which is small arm, random, which is happening, which in my opinion is the last leg, because today the government is proactive and instead of being on the defensive, they are on the offensive. So the terrorism is gradually being defeated. If this year, for example, you will see there was a record tourism in Kashmir.
Yes.
And also the terrorist pockets are now in a few districts, I think just 2 or 3. Those will also be cleaned up in my mind, but it's a slow process because it's not going to happen in short time, because these arms and ammunition has infiltrated deeper inside. Plus the generation now, it's more than 30, it's almost 33 years now. The next generation, which is now the younger generation today, they have seen the gun culture. They have seen the power of the gun, either a gun with a terrorist or with a soldier, and that is the power. So it has to change. It needs a cultural change. It needs different kind of ideas to surface for the people living there, and this gun culture should fade out and be something different, either in sports or academics or professionals, should become the goal. So it will take time.
Last year, roughly around March, in the month of March, there was a movie which was pretty much a hit. The name was Kashmir Files, and there was a huge opposition against this film. So, what is your take on that?
See, Kashmir Files was a movie which I have seen twice, and I have also promoted it to some extent because we organized a show for non-Kashmiris here in Nehru. Now, this movie was started. The initiative was taken by Kashmiri Pandits only. They had tried with a few people to narrate the story of Exodus 1919, what happened, why it hasn't reached to larger scale. Many people didn't know. Finally, one director agreed and he made a movie on it. And he's done a lot of research on it. You have to give credit to him. It's a factual movie. It's based on hardcore facts, based on incidents, real incidents which happened. But yes, a movie is a 2.5 hour thing, you can't cover everything. So there are few incidents which have been covered, majorly 2 or 3 incidents. So which is just 5% of what happened. But in those 5% of the incidents, he has tried to convey what happened, and it's all research done. Because I know he had come to our office, he had sent a message for people who were there in 19 Kashmir to narrate their stories, and he has interviewed people. And this movie is an outcome of those interviews. I think he has gone on record saying he has got 700 video recordings. Now, the narrative doesn't suit many people. So therefore, there's a narrative that this movie is biased, it's a propaganda, but that's all narrative. The fact is, the movie was hardcore, fact-based.
And for the young generation who barely knew about this movement, I think it was very touching. Like for me as a viewer, it was really very touching.
Yes, there are many like you because many people didn't know what happened, and even when these things were happening, and I was in Bombay, we never used to get much of news in Bombay. It used to be a small paragraph somewhere, two terrorist kills so and so place. So therefore, probably the exposure to this 1990 exodus was only up to Delhi. Beyond Delhi, it had diluted. Thanks to this movie, now the whole country, not the country, the whole world knows what happened. It's a kind of holocaust.
Do you think it now has had an impact on the Kashmir Valley? Do you think the mindset of people might have changed after watching this film?
Difficult to say because in Kashmir Valley the situation is always complex and there are many narratives which come into play. There will be a Pakistan narrative, there will be a local popular politics narrative, there will be a Abdullah family narrative, there will be a Mehbooba Mufti narrative, and they all play their narratives from their selfish angles. So, well, at least the narrative I have heard from different angles was this movie was in Kashmir was this movie is propaganda. There was a very objective comment made by General Attawa Asnan, who was once upon a time commanding officer of Kashmir. He said there's one point where the movie perhaps missed it because it has scared the Muslim community. Unfortunately, he himself is a Muslim and he had been in charge of Kashmir for some time. He said, according to him, he says, perhaps we should have mentioned that this movie is about this. And he says, because Muslims feel in general that as a result of this movie, the whole sentiment is anti-Muslim, which is not so. Now, the movie is basically about Kashmiri Pandits and their exodus. It doesn't blame every Muslim. In fact, there were Muslim actors in the movie. Yes. And there were Kashmiri Muslim actors in the movie. So, it's an interpretation, unfortunately, which is going wrong at some times. And the propaganda angle comes from just because our Prime Minister gave his consent or support to the movie. There are a lot of people who are anti-Prime Minister, so they read it differently.
So, even during the film, like while I was watching it, there are no precise numbers which, state that there was an exact number of genocide of the Pandits, as per government sources. Figures from within and outside are very different. Some say 7 lakh people are left, some say 1 lakh people are left. Why is there such ambiguity with the numbers?
There is, you're right, there is an ambiguity with the numbers and different people state different numbers as per their convenience because when people migrated, nobody anticipated that people will leave on January 19th. So there was no mechanism of registering it. The registration started later. People had already started migrating. Then registrations happened in Jammu and Delhi. Now, if I had migrated in 90, I was in Bombay, there was no registration in Bombay. So I may not be registered as a migrant. So therefore, there's a gap. Now, officially, it seems, if I remember right, 65,000 people were registered as migrants. 65,000 families, which would mean roughly about 2.5 to 3 lakh people. And then, many have not registered or could not register. Let's say somebody left, was in Bombay, from Bombay, reached USA, hasn't registered only. It doesn't mean he's not a migrant. Doesn't mean he was not a victim of exodus. At the same time, it's also possible some people who were not victims may have registered. People in these kind of situations, there you have slippages and overlaps. So it's difficult to know exactly how many people migrated that time. The official number we know is about 65,000 families, which I would say is somewhere between 2.5 lakh to 3 lakh people, assuming an average family size between 4 to 6.
So, whatever the numbers might be, being uprooted from one's life, like to live in a camp in such an alien environment, reliant upon food rations, must have been so traumatizing for the Kashmiri Pandits. How has this impacted the Pandit community, their sense of identity, and crucially, their idea of a home?
Very valid question, and it has been a horrible experience. It created lots of problems, health issues, psychological problems. When people lived in Jammu, people died of sunstroke, people died of snake bites, people died of scorpion bites because they were living in open grounds which were not part of the settlement anywhere. They got tents. People died of diseases they didn't know. People lost their identity. They had to stay long queues for rations. It was a horrible period, undoubtedly. But at the same time, I think I said earlier, because things have changed quite a bit since then. The first 10-15 years were a big struggle. The Kashmiri Pandit community, being basically an educated class and a working class, somehow managed. Education has always been their first priority, so they managed to get their children educated somehow or the other. Morning shift, afternoon shift, night shift, because it did put stress on infrastructure at Jammu. There were many other challenges other than this, because the infrastructure at Jammu was limited. The people looking for one room apartment or one room place, also the rates of that shot up, because there was huge demand. Imagine 2.5 lakh people landing in a village one fine morning. Where is the place? The prices of vegetables shot up, the prices of groceries shot up because there was more demand than supply. Then sometimes there was resistance from the people at Jammu also, because suddenly they felt, what is our fault? Why our cost of living is going up?
Yeah.
Because when the prices go up, it affects everyone. So there were pressures of different kinds. But things are much better today, because people have moved up from those tent houses to concrete houses. Government has built up a colony where people have at least better hygiene. Then many people have moved on with life. They have found alternative places of work, settle down in different parts of the country. Yes, the problem still remains. Identity, culture, language are a constant threat, because you are not at one place, you are scattered everywhere. And that's where a role of associations like us, we can try and tend to play our part, but we know it's a tough task.
Kashmiris hold their identity very, very close to their chests. Would you say that they are equating heritage with national identity? And why do the so-called Kashmiris feel so threatened by the assimilation and entitled to their own district's separate national identity?
See, it's a fact, because you see, as far as Kashmir Valley was concerned, the connect to India as a nation was through Kashmiri Pandits. The rest of the population was always divided. If I was to do a poll in Kashmir and give them an option, India, Pakistan or independent, there would be sort of all three divisions. While as the Kashmiri Pandit population was all for India. So therefore it is essential, because the identity of the national part of it to Kashmir was through Kashmiri Pandits. That's why they were the first threat of the jihadists, because they were seen as nationalists. And the jihadi movement was always anti-national. Yes, Kashmiri Pandit culture, identity is a focal point. That's I would think that's true to every community, because it's an easy part, because you associate with certain things. So that's why community feeling is there. But then when you are scattered, disintegration happens with time.
Moving on to my other question, some pundits complain that while the state is trying to bring back the pundits back, and they're offering them relief packages, they feel that they have done little to nothing to help the pundits who remained behind. Why would the Indian state not try to empower those who remained behind, according to you?
It's another very tricky question. I don't know whether anybody has a real answer to that, but the problem is genuine. When migration happened, there were some people who managed to stay back.
Yeah.
Now, why did they stay back? Because let me go back a little. Migration happened in 90, major. Some people still stayed back. Then there are people who migrated after 2000, when those massacres happened in places, or late 90s. So the migrations continued. It was generally those people who had no other option that they stayed back. And they somehow survived. Some of them survived, some of them still happen to be targets off and on. But the question is, how is the government going to empower them? Because ultimately they are staying in a world, they have to be in conformity with the rest. Sometimes you see that their statements come out which are part of the pressure for survival, because they have to talk the same language. Otherwise, they are likely to be victims because they are a huge minority. Minority in the sense, if in before 90 you were 2%, today you are 0.02%. So what can 0.02%, can they ever be independent? No. Therefore, they are living a certain life which is not by choice but by compulsion. Now the other part is rehabilitation. Yes, government has been trying to rehabilitate. Again, whenever it succeeds, there are new challenges which emerge. Now government made, there's a Prime Minister's employment package under which 6,000 people were given employment in Kashmir. They were working there. But the security apparatus is not such that everyone can be guaranteed security. So they become soft targets, which is what has happened in the last couple of years. There have been off and on. You see, whenever the things appear to be normal, just 2 years back, things appeared normal. That's why last year there was a huge tourism. But then suddenly there were 5-6 incidents of soft killings, targeted killings to create again an environment of insecurity. Again, after a few months, things appeared normal, same thing repeated again. So there is an attempt from Pakistan or across the border to make sure that things don't become normal and keep it on the boil. But like I said earlier, it's I call the last phase of terrorism. So these things will happen maybe for the next few years till it is rooted out. Because until and unless every weapon is exhausted and every terrorist is finished, things will not appear to be normal. They will not be normal because these soft killings will happen. I must say here that I've lived my first 15 years of life in Kashmir. My schooling was there. You never heard of a killing. I've never heard of a killing all my life there. The maximum violence that used to happen was stone throwing, which was kind of protest, which would go violent and then be stone throwing. Forget the stabbing. Never heard of stabbing. Never heard of killing. Which means, why am I saying this? Which means the population by far was non-violent, was peaceful. Murders never happened there. Murders used to happen in Jammu, Delhi, we used to hear of it, but not in Kashmir. Now the same population has been brainwashed to such an extent that they are carrying AK-47s and bombs and things like that. That means something has horribly gone wrong, and it can't happen in a day or two. That's why I said earlier it has happened over more than 10 years and reached its peak in 90s.
What does it mean to be a Kashmiri today, particularly for the youth who have grown up in the smog? Because you've just said that for the youth right now it must be very tough because they've just heard about guns, knives, and whatnot, stabbing.
You talk about Kashmiris who are living in Kashmir or those who are living outside?
Primarily the ones who are still living there. It must be so difficult in that environment because even for someone like you who's lived life a very, very long time, you were in Kashmir, you never heard of stabbing and whatnot, and now in their youth they're seeing all this stuff. So what does it mean to be a Kashmiri?
Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmir are hardly there, they're all scattered outside. But for a Kashmiri Muslim who's there, as I think I said it earlier, because they have also seen a different world. For a Kashmiri Muslim child who was born after 90 doesn't know what a Kashmiri Pandit is. Doesn't know whether he's a human being or he's from outer space. He doesn't know what Pandit culture is because last 30 years they have not seen any Pandits. When we were living, our neighbors were Muslims. My house was touching on the left, right, both sides Muslim families, and we used to exchange, we used to visit each other, we used to participate in weddings, we used to participate in festivals. But that the new generation hasn't seen. What they have seen is the power of gun, power of a militant, power of a soldier, and that is their hero. Now, therefore, it's a different life. It needs to change. You need to change things. New heroes have to emerge. Even the politically there is changing. The political of family-dominated politics is also changing. At the same time, government is spending a lot of infrastructure. The railways are now reaching there. A lot of development is happening. So at least the government is betting on once infrastructure develops, the central government, that things will change. But we have to wait and see.
Now, you mentioned the fact that government is helping a lot. They're, improvising the infrastructure out there. So, my next question to you would be that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he's proposing 3 new colonies, and it sounds as if, they're exclusively for the Pandits. So do you think that's exactly what he's trying to propose here? Or, it's a good solution towards, for the Pandits to return back if they want to that?
See, it's debatable whether it's a good solution or not. There are certain faction of Pandits, you must have heard of Pandit Kashmir, who have talked about one place settlement for Kashmiri Pandits because they say the insecurity will always be there. You need a secure environment, which means something like an Israel within Kashmir, like Israel survived in a very hostile environment. Now, this is what some associations from our community have been demanding, but I don't know, I'm not the one who can certify this is practically possible. I don't think government is also in agreement as of now, so I am not sure whether government is proposing colonies. I think what you're talking about is that is for this PM package employees. There are 3 places where they are building up colonies for them to live, because right now they are soft targets because the houses are not ready, so they are living in rented accommodation in any place, so they can be killed easily when the targets are there. But once they move to these kind of colonies, then these can be secured. They can be secure environment. So this is for their safety. But these have unfortunately delayed. They were supposed to be ready last year. The first colony was supposed to be ready in October 2022, but it hasn't got ready yet. So perhaps it's part of that. As far as exclusively for Kashmiri Pandits, I doubt that is on the government's agenda, because the government by its constitution perhaps cannot do that. They will have to make a balance somewhere. Final solution, we have to see what emerges. It's not yet clear.
Now, moving on to our final questions, I would like to ask that the Article 370, which was proposed and passed on in the recent years, do you think how big of an impact has that had on the Kashmir Valley?
See, Article 370 has had an impact, will have an impact, but you have to understand how a lot of people keep complaining Article 370 comes, so what has happened? Now, Article 370 wasn't going to change the things overnight, nor is it going to change the terrorist ecosystem, nor is it going to change the involvement of terrorist inputs which come from across the border. That Article 370 is only a constitutional thing. Now, how is it going to change? It is going to change the mindset of the people. Because Article 370 had become a political tool which the political parties within the Kashmir J&K politics had used for their vested interests. They used it part in their elections campaigns, in their slogans, and it always created a mindset that we are always different. Article 370 helps us, gives us a special status. We can always break away from Kashmir, from India, and this is the sentiment which was used. Now this is gone. Therefore, Article 370 ensures a full and final integration of J&K with India, and at least mentally, from the mindset point of view. Otherwise, it had been valued gradually. Many things were already applicable. A separate flag gives a separate identity. That's gone. Separate constitution. So these things have changed. Therefore, it's a major step towards full integration. This and against separatism.
Moving on to my final question. How can the general public at large contribute in normalizing the situation in the valley?
See, in my opinion, this is work in progress. I have seen some symptoms of this already happening. Because earlier, when there were some killings of as a result of terrorists, and we used to protest in Bombay, Kashmiri Pandits would protest, associations would protest. There was nothing happening in Kashmir. Unless an average Kashmiri living in Kashmir protests, the population of Kashmir protests, objects to it, opposes it, this is not what I know. But those things have started happening now. In the last 2 years, I have seen few incidents of local population there protesting against these killings, killing of innocent people, soft target killings, and people have been coming out and protesting. Secondly, the other change which you would have seen is on this Independence Day when the Prime Minister given a call of Har Ghar Tiranga. I saw many videos from Kashmir and even some of the districts which were known as terrorist infested districts where there were Tiranga protests. There were parades. People were carrying Tiranga tricolor and doing. There were processions in Baramulla. There was procession in Kupwara, Lal Chowk. Lot of things. These are signs of change.
Yeah.
Still early signs, but signs on the move. So unless a Kashmiri living Kashmir comes out open, because earlier they were also living under fear of the gun. They never spoke. As a result, they were perceived to be part of it. Now that fear is coming out, so they have started speaking.
So this Kashmiri youth who is now, protesting against this, are they, the Kashmiri Hindus out there, the ones that are still there, or is it even the Kashmiri Muslims?
No, when I'm talking about Kashmiri Hindus are hardly there.
Yeah.
Less than 10,000. Out of which 5,000 or 6,000 are these Prime Minister package employees. They are agitating for a different thing. They are asking for transfer because they are feeling insecure there. But against killings, I have seen Kashmiri Muslims also participating, opposing. That needs to happen in larger numbers. Because you see, this terrorism cannot survive when there is no local support. It survived, thrived because there were pockets of local support. That stops, and that is the turning point.
So
there are signs. There are early signs of that.
Yeah, because 3 or 4 years back, even I went to Kashmir, and I was interacting with the general public. They just want peace and nothing else.
You are right. They want general peace, but in the 90s, they never said that.
Yeah.
They were also threatened because it's not. The point is, if let's say if I had been placed, if I had migrated, my neighbors wouldn't want that. We had been living so many years, but they had also been threatened from their mosques. I was listening to one person's interview recently where he said, because he faced the 1990s. He says, I had grown up with Muslim friends and we were playing cricket together. And this happened in the second half of 80s. He said, gradually I found one fellow stopped playing with me. And then he told me, we have been told in the mosque to stay away from kafirs. This was preaching. Now what happened in that early 80 period was, there were priests not from Kashmir. They were from the Devbandi schools of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, which had been sent there. And they started preaching and cultivating this terrorist mentality mindset through mosques and through madrasas. And this created this kafir divide. And divide within the same community, within the same area, where people were told that these are kafirs, don't interact with them. And this divide was built up over years before 1990. So that has to change. Therefore, it's very essential. There are certain things government will have to do, there's no doubt about it. This terrorist ecosystem has to be finished. This madrasa culture has to be changed. Madrasas have to be upgraded. And there should be modern education than this mullah-based education. Then one other important aspect is that justice needs to be done. See, the exodus which happened in 1990, has anybody been punished for that? There were so many terrorist killings. Has any terrorist been caught, punished, killed, had nothing? So, and I have said the conspiracy angle needs to be investigated. There should be an inquiry. People who are responsible for that in the government, in the police, in the bureaucracy, outside that, they need to be taken to task. That is the justice to be done. That is otherwise the elements will be still thriving underground. So because this thing thrived at various levels, and it's not difficult to understand. But no investigation has happened. Even during that time, no FIRs were filed.
Bad time for Kashmir at that. So, final question of this segment. What happened 33 years back is, of course, something which is not great at all. But what do you think should be the learning for this modern India from what happened 33 years back?
See, the lesson which the rest of the country, the India needs to take from this is to nip the evil in the bud. Because as I said earlier, if the signs of Kashmir becoming a problem, which happened in finally 1990, were there early, late 70s, with the establishment of Jamaat Islami, Jamaat al-Tulba, and then madrasas. And then the terrorist activity gradually on a slower scale emerging in 80s. But there was no action taken. If the action had been taken at the right time, things would have gone out of control. The lesson for the rest of the country is to make sure such situation doesn't arise anywhere else. Because unfortunately, you see today there are situations similar, I call them mini Kashmiris, emerging in some states of states of the country, Kerala, Assam, Bihar, UP. There are pockets where there are mini Kashmir-like situations emerging. So this has to be tackled now. I think the government is aware, because the way they have cracked down on PFI, needs to crack down on all such elements before they go out of hand. In Kashmir also, if they had cracked down much earlier, things would have gone out of hand. They went out of hand in the 90s because there was no action throughout the 80s. A decade is too long a period.
Yeah.
So yes, please, my advice would be take appropriate action at the right time. The second lesson is for the Indian nationals as a whole, because we have suffered enough when the government at the center was weak. Therefore, we need to be aware weak government in an environment where we live, our surroundings, our neighborhoods are prone to these kind of disasters, the terrorist situations. So we have to have a strong government at the center, otherwise we are likely to be victims. Therefore, I think every Indian national needs to wake up to that reality. In that period from 90 to 97, I think we as a country went back by almost 20 years economically, as well as all these elements became emboldened during that time. So we have to watch out. Again, the other factor is like we can keep blaming on Pakistan, but Pakistan has a role to play. They keep doing this. They have strategies in place to target India. They have NGOs established all over the world. They keep talking about fault lines within India, fault lines which they have asked their agents and NGOs driven by them to work on are Kashmir, Khalistan, caste system in India, Hindutva. These are all fault lines they keep promoting from there. The narrative starts from there and is spread globally. So we have to counter this narrative, and all of us will have to play a role on this, government, NGOs, and even a common citizen.
Well, luckily in this timeline we do have a very strong government in the center, and as you said, and I agree with you that they're pretty much aware of the current situation. But that is it for today, guys. It was great talking to you, sir, and if you're watching till the end, stay tuned for more top quality content. Like this video and follow us on Instagram.
Thank you. Jai Hind.